Satisfied with her work, she looked into my eyes, smiling as she asked, "That was incredible. So when do we meet again?" I chuckled and replied, "I'll call you soon." She leaned over, collecting the stack of $100 bills from the nightstand, hesitating briefly as her eyes fell on a smaller stack nearby. "Take it as a tip," I told her, and with a grin, she scooped up the extra cash, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. Just before she reached the door, she turned back and said, "Merry Christmas." Her cold, transactional look shattered any illusion I might have held. Alone in that Las Vegas hotel room, the emptiness hit me. There wasn't any love, no companionship, just a costly escape. "Merry Christmas," I muttered under my breath as I rolled over and drifted off. When I woke up, I went over the weekend's events. Even with last night's splurge, I still had a $3,500 profit from blackjack. I'd aimed for $5,000 by the end of the week, but now the challenge was steeper. Every Vegas trip followed my strict playbook. Only blackjack, no drinking or gaming when fatigued, staying unnoticed, spreading bets across casinos, and bailing as soon as I hit my target. I had my own tricks, altering my look, shifting goals, and keeping away from high-stakes tables. I liked the $10 minimum bets. Sometimes I deliberately lost, made dumb plays, ordered a drink, and pretended to be just another reckless gambler. I never cashed in all my chips at once, keeping the staff off my trail. Yeah, I knew it was a matter of time before they'd catch on and kick me out. I had a knack for numbers and a memory that never missed a detail, making me good at counting cards, a skill casinos viewed as cheating. The risks were clear, but I'd first started because I needed money desperately. Now, it was about reclaiming what I'd lost, though I knew some things, like my career and Sandra, were gone for good. Once, I'd been a respected math professor. Now, every decision revolved around whether to hit or stand. Sandra's betrayal and the arrival's scheming had destroyed me. Thinking about it, I wondered how much longer I could keep bluffing in this game. I recalled my first day at the university, stepping onto that vast campus as a new assistant professor, hopelessly lost trying to find the math department. A student finally helped me, and I made my way through the maze of offices to meet the head of the department, Dr. Henry Marshall. After a hesitant knock on his door, I heard a booming voice invite me in. Behind a desk stacked with papers sat an older man with a wide smile. "You must be Andy. Hungry. Let's grab some food and a Guinness on you." "Of course," he said. That was my first encounter with Dr. Marshall. Over lunch and a few beers, he told me to call him Hank and introduced me to nearly everyone in the department. The next morning, a bit hungover and uncertain about everything, I returned to his office. Hank never wanted to lower his voice. He went over my course load and gave me an in-depth rundown of the campus dynamics. The English department clashed with Spanish. Nobody cared much for the French, and the German department was like a mythological creature few had seen. Oriental languages, up-and-comers. Chemistry gets along with biology, but not botany. Astronomy is laid back. History minds its own business, and political science is a rabble-rouser. Sports teams. Terrible, but rolling in money, he said, amused. At lunch, he took me to a local biker bar where he was a regular, known for restoring motorcycles. His current project, a 1940 Indian chief, was eagerly anticipated by everyone there. After an afternoon of heavy talk and beers, I staggered home, half-jokingly wondering if my liver would survive Hank's mentorship. The following morning, still foggy, I found my way back to Hank's office. "Andy, I was about 50-50 on whether you'd show up with a tattoo today." He joked, clearly pleased. He dove right into discussing the student orientation and his hands-off management style, which gave professors a lot of freedom. Eventually, he led me to my new office, giving me his take on each classroom. "The acoustics in your main room are dreadful, but the lousy heating will keep them awake," he said with a smirk. He explained that the location of one's office indicated their rank within the department. Down the hall, We saw a maintenance guy painting the door of what was marked as Dr. Evan Doyle's office. Hank, clearly annoyed, asked what was going on. The worker replied that he'd been told Hank had reallocated the office. Hank, frustrated but calm, told him to unlock the door. Inside, the office was decked out with plush furniture, stylish decor, and the latest equipment, including a brand new computer. Hank looked around, then turned to me and said, "Looks like Dr. Doyle used his whole budget redecorating your office, Andy. Congratulations." He then instructed the worker to change the locks and ensure Dr. Doyle had no access. "No one's moving a thing without my approval," he insisted. "The nameplate will read Dr. Andy Miller." As we walked away, Hank added, "I've placed you right in the middle of a power struggle with our associate professor. But don't worry, he'll learn his lesson." I frowned, realizing I hadn't met Dr. Doyle yet. "That's because he ignored my invitation to the meet and greet. Probably thought he was above it," Hank chuckled. On Thursday, while working in my new office, I heard the door handle rattle. I opened it to see an angry man glaring at me. "What are you doing in my office?" he demanded. "Good morning," I replied, extending a hand. "You must be Dr. Doyle. I'm Andy Miller, the new assistant professor." He ignored my hand and repeated, "Why are you in my office?" "Dr. Marshall assigned this space to me, along with the furnishings," I answered. Doyle's face turned red as he launched into a tirade in the hallway, throwing insults at Hank. "I don't care what that old fool said. You're out," he spat. I stayed calm. "I'll leave if Dr. Marshall instructs me to," I said evenly. He threatened, claiming I'd be out in 10 minutes, and stormed off toward Hank's office. Hank's secretary, Deb, had witnessed the whole scene, so Hank was well prepared when Doyle showed up. 30 minutes later, Doyle returned, seething. "I'm here to collect my furnishings," he hissed through gritted teeth. Dr. Marshall explicitly said he alone could authorize any removals, I told him, sparking another outburst from Doyle. Finally, I suggested, "Why not join us for lunch with Dr. Marshall to sort this out?" Doyle shot back with a bitter, "Go screw yourself." I locked my office and made my way to Hank's office. He'd promised to introduce me to the best burger joint in town. As I bit into the burger, I had to admit it was the best I'd ever tasted. Over a beer, Hank and I swapped stories about Doyle's recent antics. It was obvious neither of us would be on his Christmas card list. On Saturday, Hank hosted a gathering at his home for faculty. I arrived early, wine in hand, and was welcomed by his wife, Maggie. She graciously accepted the wine, introducing me around. Between conversations, Maggie shared stories about Hank that made me respect him even more. She confided that they couldn't have children, a hardship that had drawn them closer, though it also left them wondering about what could have been. At one point, she said Hank thought of me as a son, which genuinely moved me. "Well, only Maggie can get folks all teary-eyed," Hank laughed, coming out behind us. He then led me to his pristine workshop, where he showed off his meticulously restored 1940 motorbike. "Something this remarkable deserves a second shot," he said, proudly explaining the bike's journey from junkyard relic to gleaming masterpiece. I couldn't agree more. As the night wound down, Maggie kissed me on the cheek, warmly inviting me to dine with them anytime. Hank added with a wink, "I already see too much of you during the week, so no weekend invasions," and suggested, "Though I might let you help restore my latest bike project on Saturdays." That first semester, I relied heavily on Hank's guidance, and soon regarded him as a mentor. We established a standing lunch every Thursday, and by the second week, he insisted on treating. I started to find my footing in the classroom, diving deeper into theorems, and mastering the material. Numbers had always been my strength. I'd been branded a math nerd back in high school. Through undergrad, a master's, and my doctorate, I turned down various job offers, choosing instead an assistant professorship to focus on research alongside Hank. Together, we spent long afternoons working through equations and eventually published a paper offering new insights into the Hodgkin conjecture. The paper sparked debates and brought attention to our work, though Dr. Evan Doyle openly criticized it, fueling further tensions within the department. In my second year, I continued refining our research, often using Hank as a sounding board. When my office was moved next to Hank's, it was a sign that I was being groomed for his position when he retired. Gaining tenure was another milestone, though Doyle opposed it, accusing Hank of favoritism. An independent review cleared Hank, but the whole ordeal clearly took a toll on him. When I became an associate professor, my previous position opened up again. To avoid further criticism, Hank formed a hiring committee, which included Doyle. Doyle resisted any candidate who had shown support for either Hank or me. Then Sandra Perry entered the scene. Her credentials and charm immediately impressed everyone, especially Doyle. After she left the room, Doyle couldn't stop raving about her, and Hank and I agreed she'd be a good fit. Sandra became the new assistant professor, and as we left the meeting, I suggested to Hank, "Give her my cold, drafty classroom." He raised an eyebrow, and I added, "With her looks, every guy in the room's going to need a cold shower." He laughed, kept my classroom for me, but reassigned my freshman courses. At Hank and Maggie's annual party, I noticed Sandra alone, her wine glass empty. I introduced myself, saying, "Hi, I'm Andy Miller." She smiled and responded, "Hello, Dr. Miller. It's a pleasure to work with you." "Call me Andy," I offered. "Miller suits you," she replied. "Call me Sandra." Hank joined us, chuckling. "Andy, you're more than just my poor lunch buddy now." He then offered Sandra a tour of the party, adding, "Let's go track down my wife in this crowd." Watching them walk off, I couldn't help but feel a void. Throughout the evening, I found excuses to cross paths with Sandra, making small talk each time. Eventually, I brought her another glass of wine and spotted her talking to Doyle. When I handed her the wine, she thanked me warmly, though Doyle gave me a dark look before dismissing me from their conversation. Not wanting to make waves, I joined Maggie, who seemed to share my thoughts, watching Sandra and Doyle with a frown. "This is the first time Doyle has shown up at one of our parties," she noted. "It's obvious why he came." "Where's Hank?" I asked. "Hiding in the shop, disgusted with Doyle." "Are you going to join him?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, but tell Hank I'll meet him tomorrow at the office. We can work on that BSA bike in the evening." Saturday came, and though I was in the office, I couldn't get Sandra off my mind. Frustrated, I went to Hank's workshop. "About time you showed up," he teased. "I had to replace you with a new mechanic." Sandra was there, dressed casually, clearly just enjoying Hank's company. Sandra and Maggie decided we should all go out to eat, and it's your treat, Hank continued with a laugh. We agreed and headed to a cozy Italian restaurant that overlooked the usual dress code for Hank, who was a regular. The bill was steep, but sitting next to Sandra made every penny worth it. Later, at a jazz bar, I asked Sandra to dance. As we swayed, she leaned back and said, "I should be mad at you." "Why?" I asked, confused. "You left me with Doyle," she replied. "He made my skin crawl and told me to follow him home." I apologized, and she softened, saying, "I could make it up to you by taking you out on Friday." Soon, we were dating exclusively, though Doyle kept pestering her. She joined Hank and me in our research on the Hodgkin conjecture, though Doyle frequently tried to disrupt our work. He even tried to offer his help, but Doyle's efforts to drive a wedge between us failed. After that school year, Sandra and I got married, and for 4 years, I was blissfully wed to the most wonderful woman. I enjoyed my work, my friendship with Hank, and even managed to restore a 1969 Harley-Davidson electric ride. The only challenge left was the Hodgkin conjecture, which still escaped me. One day, feeling frustrated with my calculations, I began thinking about how to make math exciting for kids. It struck me that elementary education was falling short, especially in math. That's when I got an idea to create entertaining math shows for children, using the university's broadcasting system and involving celebrities. That Saturday night, we went to Hank's place to grill steaks. After dinner, I brought up the idea. Guys, the way we're teaching math to kids is failing them. We need to make fun, engaging shows that cover the basics. I explained how we could use the university's broadcasting setup and bring in well-known figures to make math enjoyable. The idea took hold quickly, and I saw the excitement growing in Hank and Sandra's eyes. I envisioned them as co-hosts once everything was in motion. When the show premiered, it was a hit, getting syndicated nationwide and generating revenue for the university, and a share of that for Hank, Sandra, and me. Hank and Sandra became recognizable figures, while I worked mostly behind the scenes, scripting episodes. This break from the Hodgkin conjecture brought me a welcome relief. I even co-authored several math textbooks, and Sandra and I began discussing the idea of having children. But she felt the timing wasn't quite right. Unexpectedly, Hank announced he was stepping down to emeritus status and recommended me as his replacement. I felt a mix of pride and sadness at the thought of taking his place, but I prepared myself for the promotion process. At the open hearing, just when I thought things were going smoothly, Reese Cook, a former student, leveled a shocking accusation against me. She claimed I coerced her into an affair. I denied it vehemently, but the committee allowed her to speak on. I saw Sandra's tear-streaked face, and a wave of devastation washed over me. Reese's roommates supported her story, and Sandra left the room before they'd even finished. When it was my turn to defend myself, I denied the allegations and demanded an investigation, but it was too late. The committee decided against my promotion. I left the hearing only to find that Sandra had packed her things and was gone. I went straight to Hank. He was shocked and outraged, encouraging me to fight back, but my focus was on finding Sandra. Despite all my efforts, I couldn't locate her. To make matters worse, the university appointed Doyle as interim department head and stripped me of my office. Weeks later, I got a 2 a.m. call from Maggie. Hank had died of a heart attack before I could reach the hospital. The funeral was a blur of grief, and afterward, Maggie decided to move to Florida to be near her sister, leaving me feeling utterly alone. Not long after, Doyle was officially promoted to Hank's former position. He summoned me to his office and made me wait for 2 hours before accusing me of plagiarism. When I asked who had made the allegation, he smirked and replied, "Your wife, Sandra." Another committee was formed, this time chaired by the dean, to investigate the claims. I brought an attorney and anxiously awaited Sandra's testimony. When she entered, she glared at me with pure hatred. As I tried to speak, my lawyer motioned for me to keep quiet. Sandra testified that I'd stolen research from Doyle with Hank's help. My lawyer tried but couldn't break down her story. She finished without so much as a glance in my direction, and shortly after, I was fired for plagiarism. 2 weeks later, divorce papers arrived. At the deposition, I couldn't stop myself from interrupting the talk to her, earning a contempt citation from the judge. Eventually, the divorce went through, with Sandra taking 65% of our assets, the house, and 2 years of alimony. As she left the courtroom, Doyle was there to console her. Later, Sandra even sued me for the rights to the TV show. I threw the papers down, got on my bike, and rode aimlessly. I didn't attend the hearings, so I assumed she won by default. With everything I'd worked for gone, I couldn't find any job in academia or business. With no options left, I thought about taking on manual labor. Sitting in a coffee shop near Las Vegas, I decided to take a shot at the casino scene. I watched the games for hours, concluding that blackjack had the best odds if I could master a system. Starting cautiously, I observed other players, then began to play. After 6 hours, I was up $3,000. It felt like a revelation. I checked into a casino hotel and crashed. The next day, I kept learning, picking up tips about comps, player cards, and blackjack techniques. I realized I needed to switch casinos regularly to avoid attracting too much attention. As I traveled between casinos, my earnings grew, and I managed to keep up with the alimony payments, mailing them through postal money orders, and including notes begging Sandra to contact me. She never responded. To avoid carrying too much cash, I converted my winnings into rare coins at coin shops after flights. I kept a small bank account to show a traceable income for the IRS, but left as little trace as possible. Although I had some savings now, it wasn't nearly enough to retire on. 3 years passed since my disgrace, and when the alimony ended, I woke up the day after Christmas next to an escort I'd hired on impulse. I'd called Maggie the night before to wish her a Merry Christmas, a call that threw me off. "Maggie, just calling to wish you a Merry Christmas," I'd said. "Oh, Andy, it's so good to hear from you. You should spend the holidays with me," she said. I laughed. "Santa and I don't exactly mix. How are you, honey?" "I was worried when I heard the news," she added, a note of concern in her voice. I frowned. "What news, Maggie?" After a long pause, she said, "Forgive me, Andy. I thought you were calling to commiserate. Sandra remarried." Her voice broke, and I was speechless. I'd held on to some hope that maybe, one day, Sandra might forgive me. "Remarried?" I asked, feeling numb. "Who did she marry?" "It doesn't matter, Andy. Let it go, please," she pleaded. But I insisted. Finally, she said, "It was Doyle. They had a baby last month." I muttered that I had to go and hung up. Maggie tried calling back immediately, but I ignored it and went straight to the bar. I ordered top-shelf bourbon and called for an escort. 3 years without indulgence, and I could hardly believe Sandra had moved on. I downed bourbon until the escort arrived, agreed on a price, and found a strange comfort in the company of a stranger. The next morning, hungover and drained, I showered and headed to the lobby bar. Typically, I avoided drinking when gambling, but today was an exception. I planned to drink, hydrate, and rest. While I was sipping a Bloody Mary, watching the bustling crowd, someone sat beside me. I glanced over to see a familiar face, Meredith, an attractive brunette blackjack dealer from the casino. She was good with rookies, handled tough players with ease, and I always enjoyed her shifts. I'd often tipped her well, sometimes even playing a hand in her name for extra tips. Though we hadn't exchanged words before, we'd shared a mutual recognition. In her uniform, dark pants, white shirt, dark vest, and name tag, she smiled briefly before ordering. "Hey Meredith, what's it gonna be?" the bartender asked. "Hi Frank, just a 7-Up, no ice," she replied. Frank placed her drink on a napkin. Oddly, she added another napkin beneath it, drank quickly, and slipped out, brushing her cup against mine as she left. I found it a bit rude but let it go. When I reached for my empty cup, I noticed a message scrawled on the napkin beneath it. "They are watching you." My pulse quickened, but I stayed calm, covering the napkin with my hand and motioning for the bartender to clear the glass. I pretended to clean my glasses, discreetly pocketing the napkin, and left some cash for my drink. Unsure whether I was actually under surveillance, I exited without incident. Back in my hotel room, I read the message again and then flushed the napkin, deciding to avoid gambling for the time being, hoping that a shift in my routine might either make the casino act or lose interest if they were watching me. I spent the day letting the TV play as background noise, flipping through channels without much interest. By the next morning, still uncertain, I knew I had to contact Meredith somewhere away from the casino's watchful eyes. From a bar on the mezzanine, I observed her shift and noted she took the number 7 bus to get home. The next day, I rode several buses, checking to see if I was being followed, but no one seemed to be trailing me. 20 minutes before her shift ended, I boarded the number 7 bus. When Meredith got on, I whispered, "We need to talk." Her eyes widened in recognition, and she quickly got off at the next stop. I followed her into an IAOP, where we found a table, and she spoke first. "I wondered if you'd contact me," she said. When I didn't see you, I thought you'd left town." I leaned forward, anxious. "Who are they? Why are they watching me?" She settled back in her chair. "You know why. They think you're counting cards." "Then why haven't they come after me?" I asked. "Because they're not certain yet," she replied. "They're watching to be sure. You don't fit the usual profile. You play at low-stakes tables. You don't make big moves even when the odds are favorable. And sometimes you even make dumb bets and lose money." Just then, the waitress came by, and we placed our orders. While waiting, I thought of more questions. "How'd they even notice me?" I asked. "Hard to say," she replied. "You're just on their radar." "And how did you find out about it?" I pressed. She sighed. "They asked me to keep an eye on you." I studied her for a moment. "So, why warn me?" She hesitated, then said, "I started working at the casino to save for college, but then I got pregnant, and my boyfriend became abusive. I left him and struggled to get by. A few years back, I reported a lucky player to security, and they took him away. I got a raise afterward, but I heard rumors about what happened to him. I didn't want that kind of guilt on my conscience again." Our food arrived, and as we began to eat, I looked at her. "How can I trust you?" She held my gaze. "You can't." After we finished, we ordered more coffee. "So I'm on their radar, but not in trouble yet?" I asked. "That's right," she confirmed. I slumped back, considering my bleak prospects. "What's wrong?" she asked. This was my last shot. Gambling was supposed to be my way out. "Why?" she asked, and I explained my life story and the scandals that led me here. After a pause, she suggested, "Why not switch to poker?" "I don't know how to play poker," I admitted. "You've been making money at blackjack, but you don't know poker." She looked surprised. I shrugged. "Blackjack's simple. You just beat the dealer or let them bust. I've never learned poker." "In poker, you're up against other players, not the house," she explained. "Casinos don't care if people count cards at poker tables. Plus, poker's played with one deck per hand." I considered the benefits. "Teach me," I said impulsively. She looked doubtful. "And then you leave in a few weeks, right?" she asked. "I'll make it worth your while," I replied. "I'll rent an apartment in your name for a year, paid up front, plus $500 a month for lessons. I'll cover all expenses, so no rent or daycare costs. That's $6,000 right away, plus a free place to stay." She thought it over carefully, then finally nodded. "Deal," she said. The next day, after her shift, I met Meredith to help her and her daughter move out of the trailer park. At 7 p.m., I drove a U-Haul into the park, feeling uneasy under the watchful eyes of the residents. Meredith and her daughter quickly approached, each carrying a large duffel bag. They climbed in, and with a nervous look, Meredith urged me to get moving. I pulled out of the park swiftly, and her little girl clung tightly to Meredith, looking scared. "Is this everything?" I asked Meredith, concerned. "That's all we've got left. Anything decent was taken long ago," she replied. That was my first real glimpse into the challenges they'd faced. After a short drive, we arrived at the apartment I'd arranged. I handed Meredith the key, and they carried their bags inside. The little girl, full of excitement, explored the empty rooms. Meredith explained how their belongings had been stolen bit by bit, and all they had left was what fit in those bags. "Mommy, only one room has furniture," her daughter noted. Meredith introduced her to me, and after an initial shyness, she hid behind her mother. "I thought you'd have more stuff," I said, glancing at the empty rooms. "That's why I rented the truck." I told them, "Tonight, you and Pamela can take my room. I'll sleep on the floor out here. Tomorrow, we'll get some furniture." Meredith hesitated but agreed, and they retreated to the room, locking the door behind them. I settled down on the living room floor, spending the night in discomfort. In the morning, I woke to see Pamela staring at me before she quickly scurried away. "Did you sleep?" Meredith asked. "Oh, Meredith." I stretched. trying to ease the stiffness. "Like a rock," I replied sarcastically. Pamela's stomach growled, and I realized I hadn't stopped the kitchen. "Let's grab some breakfast, then pick up furniture and groceries for your shift tonight," I suggested. At a diner, Pamela ate hungrily, and Meredith, looking embarrassed, explained their financial struggles. "You don't need to explain," I told her. Pamela beamed when I suggested getting blueberry muffins to go. At the furniture store, Meredith gravitated toward the cheapest options, but I insisted on something better. Eventually, she chose a modest, well-made bedroom set. Pamela was thrilled at the idea of a queen-sized bed and her own dresser. "What about the living room and kitchen?" I asked, sparking another debate. Meredith insisted we didn't need anything fancy, but I stood firm. "If you don't choose, I'll let Pamela pick," I joked, which made Pamela giggle. Meredith finally picked out some comfortable, simple pieces. I paid in cash and got a small discount, and then we headed to Costco for kitchen essentials, linens, and a few other items. I noticed Pamela admiring the electronics section, so I suggested Meredith and Pamela handle groceries while I picked up the other items. Knowing it was pointless to argue, she agreed, and they grabbed another cart. When I caught up with them at checkout, Meredith eyed me suspiciously. "Where'd you go?" she asked. "Impulse shopping," I said with a grin. She seemed apologetic, but I reassured her, and we pushed our loaded carts to the van. A passerby joked about us buying out the store, and I responded, "It takes this much to keep the kid fed," making Pamela laugh. Back at the apartment, we all pitched in to unload. Meredith surprised me with her strength, and we managed to get everything inside. When I brought in the home entertainment center, complete with a 42-inch TV, an Xbox, and games, Meredith gave me a mock glare as Pamela cheered. "So that's why you disappeared," Meredith teased. Pamela was beside herself with excitement. "This is part of my teaching method," I joked, trying to sound serious. "When Pamela learns her lessons, she'll be rewarded." Pamela immediately started exploring each game with wide-eyed enthusiasm. Meredith left to get ready for work, and when she returned, she found me and Pamela on the floor, assembling the new furniture. I turned it into a math lesson, having Pamela count screws and calculate parts. Meredith watched in amazement as we worked together. "All my life, I've wanted to teach," I said, watching Meredith's reaction. She shook her head slightly, offered a goodbye, and headed to work. I spent the rest of the day assembling furniture, reinforcing Pamela's math skills while we worked. By the time Meredith returned, I had her bedroom set up. I knew she'd probably rearrange things, but I figured the effort might make her smile. I had burgers on the grill so Meredith could relax and enjoy listening to Pamela's enthusiastic retelling of our day. After dinner, Meredith gave Pamela a bath and put her to bed while I cleaned up the kitchen. When Meredith returned in an oversized t-shirt and sweats, she looked effortlessly beautiful. "Thanks for setting up my room," she said with a smile. "I hope you don't mind if I change things around a bit." We both laughed, and as we sat down, I showed her the nanny cams and explained how to access the feed. She looked at me seriously. "If I thought for a second that you hurt my child, we wouldn't be here. Your offer has been a lifeline for us. But if I'd had any doubts, we would have stayed in that place," she said, her blue eyes filled with clarity. "Now that you've been teaching Pamela all day, it's time you learned something," she said, pulling out a deck of cards. We started with 5-card draw poker as she explained the different hand rankings, from a royal flush down to the high card. I grasped the concepts easily, understanding the odds. We played late into the night, with her winning consistently. Finally, she called it a night, saying she needed sleep, and I headed to bed, feeling frustrated that poker didn't come as naturally as I'd hoped. Still, I was oddly comforted by the lingering scent of her perfume on the sheets. The next morning, I awoke to the aroma of bacon and eggs. Stumbling out, I found Pamela at the table, counting Cheerios and practicing her adding and subtracting before eating. Meredith was at the stove, setting the table with a warm smile. Seeing them together in that simple domestic scene struck me. It was the kind of life I'd been missing. All my meals had been alone, eaten quickly in public. A wave of sadness hit me, but Meredith's smile lifted my spirits. I sat down, trying to join in the light conversation, though Meredith noticed something was off. After breakfast, I kept myself busy with Pamela's math games to avoid any questions from her. Before leaving for work, Meredith gently asked if I was okay. "I will be," I replied, lying a bit to reassure her. Weeks went by in this routine. Breakfast, lessons with Pamela, Meredith off to work, more lessons, dinner, Pamela's bedtime, and then poker training. We worked through various games, and though I picked up the rules, I kept losing. It made me doubt my investment in this arrangement, but I stuck with it. One night, while playing Texas Hold'em, I got a royal flush, but before I could place a bet, Meredith folded. Frustrated, I asked how she guessed my hand. She explained that I'd been giving away subtle tells that revealed what I was holding. That night marked the start of advanced lessons focused on reading opponents, bluffing, and refining my strategy. Over the next 2 months, I continued teaching Pamela, who excelled in everything from basic math to early algebra. Meredith worried she might be bored at school, but I assured her that Pamela would thrive. When the time came for Pamela's school orientation, Meredith took the day off and asked me to join them. I could see how nervous she was, hovering over Pamela like a protective mom. Pamela, though, seemed thrilled and eager to join her new classmates. Just before class began, she surprised us both by giving me a big hug. Touched, I encouraged her, and she joined the other kids. Afterward, Meredith wiped away tears, and I suggested we spend the day at a park rather than head home. We wandered around the park, enjoying ice cream and sitting quietly on a bench. Slowly, Meredith opened up about how she and Pamela ended up in Las Vegas. She'd grown up with a father who struggled with addiction, kicking her out at 18. She moved to Vegas, met Arthur, and got pregnant. While Meredith worked at a casino, Arthur stayed home, drinking and eventually getting involved with meth. Things escalated until he became abusive, and after a police raid, he even threatened her from jail. She took Pamela and moved to a rundown trailer park, trying to survive. Tears began streaming down her face as she shared her fears about losing Pamela. I dropped my ice cream and put my arms around her as she cried, though some passers-by shot us curious looks, assuming I was the cause of her distress. I reassured her, reminding her of her strength. She looked up at me with tear-streaked eyes. "Do you think I'm beautiful?" she asked, vulnerable yet defiant. "More than that," I replied, feeling my heart pound. "You're one of the most beautiful, desirable women I know. I only wish I had a chance with you." She blinked, surprised. "Why haven't you told me before?" she asked. I hesitated. "I'm just a washed-up professor, surviving off casino wins. I have nothing to offer, and I'm a lot older than you. You and Pamela deserve better. Living with you two has been the best part of my life, and now I've probably messed that up by saying this." She smiled. "You finally went against your logical brain and took a chance. That's the right move." We kissed deeply until a police officer approached, checking if everything was all right. After explaining, we both laughed, feeling a new bond growing between us. Living together, we grew closer even with Pamela around. She noticed the changes, asking to spend more time together as a family. My confidence grew as my understanding of human behavior improved, and eventually, Meredith declared me trustworthy. To test my skills, I accompanied her to the casino. An hour after she started her shift, I went in, feeling the familiarity to play blackjack, but I spotted a security guard watching me, and changed course, heading to the poker tables instead. I spent a week observing the players, noting their mannerisms and strategies. When I shared my insights with Meredith, she confirmed that the casino was still in wait and see mode with me. Meredith insisted on keeping up with our training sessions, hinting it was her way of contributing. We tried to progress our relationship when Pamela was asleep, but the physical tension between us was growing. I joked about letting Pamela have a sleepover with friends, but Meredith laughed, saying that was a few years off. We settled into our routine, trying to manage our building frustrations. Watching the poker players each night, I began to recognize patterns. The loud braggarts, the cautious strategists, the quiet pros, the superstitious types, and the charming women who played on their looks. I could pick up tells on most players, but a few seasoned pros remained mysteries. I knew I had to enter the game soon. My resources were thinning. I planned to sit in on a $1/$10 hold'em game that Friday night, a time when Meredith would be home with Pamela, so they could have Saturday together. Rested and ready, I entered the casino and went straight to the poker section, spotting the usual escort trailing me to the table. I took my seat, hoping Meredith was right, and that the casino would leave me alone as long as I played clean. I bought in and studied the faces around the table, wondering who would turn out to be the sucker in this game. By Saturday afternoon, I stumbled back to the apartment, where Meredith and Pamela were watching a Pixar movie. Meredith looked up with concern. "Well," she asked. I tossed her an envelope stuffed with $100 bills. She let out a cheer, hugging and kissing me as Pamela, oblivious to it all, joined in the hug. I told Pamela she could pick the restaurant for dinner, and we ended up at Chuck E. Cheese. After ordering, Pamela ran off to play while Meredith asked me about the game. "It went smoothly," I replied. "You trained me well." I saw the game unfold like a chessboard. I wasn't the biggest winner, but I did pretty well. A pro at the table recognized my skill, and we stayed out of each other's way. Security didn't hassle me, so I cashed out and came home. Meredith nuzzled against me. "Half of this is yours," I said, handing her a portion of the winnings. "You went above and beyond to get me here. We're partners now." Meredith's eyes welled up. But before she could respond, our food arrived, and Pamela rejoined us. Under the table, I felt Meredith's foot sliding up and down my leg, her silent signal of connection. To keep gambling from interfering with our lives, Meredith and I established some ground rules. I could only play when Pamela was occupied or with Meredith. I'd buy in with a set amount, never chase losses, and any profits would go into a shared account. We made a commitment to a weekly family activity, and our physical relationship grew more intense, though we remained cautious with Pamela around. When I entered a satellite poker tournament, winning $25,000 and a ticket to the World Series of Poker, we celebrated with an Italian dinner, Meredith's choice this time. Back at the apartment, Pamela headed to bed, and Meredith and I started our usual cuddling on the couch. Then she surprised me by saying she wanted to play poker. "Meredith, you've got to be kidding. I'm all worked up, and now you want to play cards," I said, incredulous. She grinned, kissed me, then strolled to the kitchen table and grabbed a deck of cards. As she shuffled, an old worry nagged at me. She noticed. "What's wrong, Andy? Every time I shuffle, you get that look." "Just a feeling I can't shake," I admitted. "Well, let's keep your mind off that. We're playing strip poker," she said casually, continuing to shuffle. The only sound was the cards as she dealt, announcing she was all in. I called her bet with a terrible hand, a deuce and a 3. She stood, peeled off her clothes, and revealed her flawless figure, her eyes a mix of excitement and vulnerability. When I undressed, she seemed pleased. We moved to my room, and her responses were everything I'd hoped for, her voice rising in breathless gasps. She clung to me, whispering, "Forgive me if I don't get this right. The only person I've been with is Arthur." I reassured her, and we continued, both of us giving in completely. When it was over, we cuddled, though as dawn approached, Meredith returned to Pamela's room. Despite my frustration, I knew this was the beginning of something deeper between us. Our evenings became explorations of each other's desires, and we rarely went to sleep unsatisfied. We thought we were keeping our relationship under wraps, But one stormy night, Pamela asked to sleep in our bed. Thankfully, we were covered, and we comforted her through the night. The next morning, over breakfast, Pamela revealed she'd known for weeks. "I just don't get why Mom can't stay in one bed all night," she said, setting us off laughing. As the World Series of Poker approached, I grew nervous about media attention, but fortunately, ESPN focused on the high-profile players, leaving me under the radar. On my first hand, I was dealt pocket aces. I played it cool, building the pot with a few calls. The flop revealed 2 more aces and a king of clubs, giving me 4 of a kind. Some players went all in, and I followed suit, noticing the cameras zooming in on us. The other players revealed their hands, a mix of pairs and a full house, but none could top my quads. The last 2 cards didn't change a thing, and I quadrupled my stack right there, taking control of the table. The first day ended with me as one of the chip leaders, and I returned to the apartment exhausted. Meredith greeted me, thrilled by my progress, and took care of me with food and a back massage before tucking me into bed. On the second day, I was moved to a new table, still in the lead. My confidence grew as I used my position to put pressure on the others, and by the day's end, I'd increased my chip count even further, leaving frustrated players in my wake. Soon, I started drawing more attention, and an associate producer requested an interview. Reluctantly, I agreed, as it was part of the contract. The interview was tense. I was curt, giving little away, leaving the interviewer flustered. As I left, I overheard someone asking why I'd been so difficult. Back at the apartment, I warned Meredith that trouble might be brewing. She told me to ignore it and focus on the game. Then a media report hit, branding me as the disgraced professor leading the World Series of Poker. My past scandals were now public knowledge, and some players tried to get under my skin with it, but I managed to keep my composure and continued winning. The situation escalated when a news crew ambushed Meredith and Pamela on their way to school, firing questions until Meredith retreated with Pamela. They kept this from me to protect my focus, but the stress on them was building. While I quietly rose through the ranks, Meredith and Pamela were under immense pressure. Meredith was even questioned at work, and Pamela faced teasing at school. Finally, I reached the final table. The tournament paused for additional TV coverage, and I agreed to a brief factual statement about my past without taking any live questions. I recounted my story, apologizing for my behavior in the previous interview and explaining my desire to protect Meredith and Pamela. Choking up, I ended with a plea for privacy for my family. When I got home, we all tried to decompress, knowing that the final cash prize could be substantial. My interview aired on multiple networks, and to my surprise, a persistent reporter found and spoke with Maggie, who confirmed my side of the story. The reporter even tried tracking down my accusers, though I wouldn't learn about this until later. For now, all I wanted was to enjoy some time with Meredith and Pamela before the tournament resumed. I suggested a trip to the Grand Canyon, and we packed a picnic, spending a peaceful day there. As we returned to the apartment, Pamela ran inside ahead of us while Meredith and I grabbed our things from the car. A strange feeling hit me, but before I could fully process it, I heard Pamela scream. Meredith and I rushed in, and there, standing in our living room, was a tall, disheveled man holding Pamela, a large hunting knife pressed near her. "God damn it, Meredith. I'll end her if you don't back off," he shouted. Terrified, Meredith took a step back, pleading, "Please, Arthur, don't hurt her. Please." It was Arthur. He'd found us, high on meth. He had apparently heard about my tournament winnings and had broken in, ransacking the place for cash. "I want the money you won," he sneered. "Give me all of it, and maybe you and this little one will live. I'll leave a mark on you, but he'll live." Meredith, trembling, tried to explain that the tournament chips weren't actual cash and that we hadn't received anything yet, but Arthur wasn't listening. The drugs had him fixated. Every plea for Meredith only seemed to rile him up more. I knew I had to step in. "Arthur, I'm the one after. I'll give you everything I've got. Just let Pamela go, I said, keeping my voice steady. Recognizing me, Arthur sneered. I know you. You're the pathetic person who took her from me. Do you want her? Then you're gonna pay. Pamela struggled in his grip, and he raised the knife close to her face. I lunged, grabbing his wrist and forcing him to release Pamela. She broke free, running to Meredith as I yelled, "Run!" I focused on Arthur, grappling with him as he lashed out. His strength, built from prison time, overpowered me. The knife slashed across my skin, but I held my ground, buying time for Meredith and Pamela to escape. Bleeding, I blocked the door, determined to protect them. Arthur took pleasure in tormenting me, his knife tracing painful lines across my skin. As my strength waned, he seemed to sense it was time to leave, pushing me aside to make his escape. With one last surge of energy, I tackled him, but he struck back, pinning me down. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping. I'd failed too many times in life, and now I was failing them. The last thing I saw was Arthur's gloating face as he prepared for the final blow. Then I heard Pamela's voice, clear and desperate. "Don't hurt my daddy." Her words cut deeper than any wound, and I clung to them with everything I had left. A sharp, jolting shock surged through me, and everything went dark. I was pulled back by an annoying, persistent beeping. My mind struggled to place it until I opened my eyes and saw the stark white ceiling tiles above me. Voices around me murmured, "He's coming around." Activity buzzed around, and then I felt Meredith's warm, soft hand gripping mine as she cried over me. I tried to speak, but she just smiled through her tears, shaking her head, and I faded out again. When I woke up next, Meredith was still there, holding my hand in the intensive care unit. She reassured me that I'd lost a lot of blood and needed stitches, but I would be okay. Apparently, the police had intervened before Arthur could finish me off. I would soon be moved to a regular room. I tried to talk, but I couldn't, and I drifted back to sleep. The next time I woke up, I was in a different room, with Meredith still by my side, though she looked utterly exhausted. "You need to go home and rest," I told her. She refused, saying she and Pamela were managing fine here. At the mention of Pamela, memories of her screams surfaced, and my face twisted with pain. The last thing I heard was Pamela begging Arthur not to hurt her daddy. I thought we'd become a family, and losing that's what hurt most. "Listen," Meredith said, her voice firm. "We are a family. Pamela was crying for you. You know how I know. You told me to go home, not to the apartment, but home. Anywhere we're together is home." Before I could respond, Pamela jumped up onto the bed, crying, "Daddy, Daddy." I wrapped my arms around her, and the three of us held each other, tears flowing freely. The nurses respectfully gave us some time alone. Once we calmed down, Meredith updated me. Arthur's actions had been caught on the nanny cams, securing a long prison sentence for him. The video had even made national news. The World Series of Poker organizers had contacted Meredith to ask if I could continue, leaving the decision to me. "What do you think, Meredith? Should I go back or just give it up?" I asked. She smiled, her voice soft but steady. "I'm just glad you asked. This is your decision. Your family is behind you 100%. And so, despite being a bit battered, I found myself back at the final table, determined to see it through. I played conservatively, letting others duke it out as the blinds rose. One player, a classic bully, taunted everyone, including me, dragging out my past to get under my skin. I knew the organizers would reprimand him for it, but confronting him directly would only signal that he'd succeeded. So I let his jabs roll off, even when he celebrated each win obnoxiously. Play continued, and I managed to hold on by occasionally taking the blinds. Eventually, it came down to 3 players, the bully, a short-stacked guy, and me. The short stack went all in and lost, leaving just me and the bully. Showgirls paraded out trays of $100 chips, creating an impractical but dramatic mountain of cash in the center. Now it was down to one-on-one. The bully ramped up his insults, crossing the line by calling Meredith a meth head. I warned him that he could say what he wanted about me, but my family was off limits. He smirked. I tried to focus, but memories of the Hodge conjecture crept in, unbidden. He kept taunting, and I found myself getting distracted, mentally working through equations instead of focusing on the cards. When I managed to take half his chips with a full house, I asked sarcastically, "Do you plan to dance?" which only enraged him further. He insulted Meredith again, and I nearly lunged across the table, causing the game to pause. Looking over at Meredith and Pamela in the audience, both visibly upset, I knew I had to keep my cool. I tried to settle my mind by imagining Meredith shuffling cards during our poker lessons, her motions reminding me of solving equations. Lost in thought, I was shaken back to reality by the realization that I hadn't even looked at my cards. There were 5 million chips in the pot. I glanced at Meredith and yelled, "The conjecture." Her expression shifted, as though she understood the weight of that realization. Without looking at my cards, I raised, unnerving the bully. When the flop came, I went all in, still blind to my own hand. I walked over to Meredith, wrapping her in my arms as the uproar swelled around us. The bully called my bet, and I turned to see that I'd hit a jack-high flush against his straight. Luck was on my side. The room erupted, and I was finally brought back for the winner's presentation. The bully stormed off, and I gave a few brief remarks, refusing the gold champion's bracelet in favor of a paper one that Pamela had made for me. We celebrated in a penthouse suite provided by the casino. Afterward, with the winning secured, I requested legal pads, pens, and a laptop to start documenting my breakthrough. 3 months later, an article titled "The Solution to Hodgkin's Conjecture," co-authored by Dr. Henry Marshall and me, was published. The math world was abuzz, and Maggie Marshall and I were awarded $1 million for our contribution. CBS's 60 Minutes featured me as the bad boy math genius. In their investigation, they tracked down my accusers from years before. One of them broke down, while others recanted, revealing that even Doyle and the dean had coerced them. Doyle had used videotapes to blackmail the girls and even traded grades for favors. The accusers admitted they'd been forced to make false statements against me to retrieve their videos. 60 Minutes aired a clip of Doyle and the dean with the young women, followed by a tearful apology from one accuser asking for my forgiveness. The segment ended with 60 Minutes' iconic ticking watch. After the show, my phone didn't stop ringing. I monitored caller IDs, ignoring those from old friends and colleagues who had abandoned me, only to now express support. Then my parents called. Though they'd been quick to judge me in the past, I decided to hear them out. The only person I genuinely wanted to speak with was Maggie. We both cried, finally feeling the weight of vindication lift, though it had come at a steep price. The university's board of trustees reached out, offering me the chance to return. I flew back with Meredith and Pamela, considering several offers. While waiting in the VIP lounge at the airport, I saw Sandra approaching. Even after all these years, her beauty struck me. "Hello, Andy," she said, her voice soft, making my heart skip. "Sandra," I managed to reply, feeling memories flooding back. She paused, as if struggling to begin, then admitted, "I thought about crashing the trustees' event, but even the dean and I are now persona non grata there." She looked down. Evan's past is catching up with him. Some of his victims came forward, even some from our marriage. She took a deep breath. "I left him. I'm taking my son back home to start over. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking you to consider us. We were so perfect together. I loved you deeply, but when I heard those accusations, I reacted poorly. I just wanted to hurt you back. You'd love my son. He's an amazing little boy. If it's not too late, would you consider giving us another chance? If not, I understand, but I need your forgiveness." Stunned, I replied, "Sandra, seeing you brings back some happy memories. In a perfect world, we might be able to start over. Her face brightened. But we're not in a perfect world. Meredith may not have your polish, but she's my partner. She'd stand by me through anything. We're solid, and I can't see my life without her. Sandra's face fell as I continued. I can forgive what you did to me. It led me to Meredith. But I can't forgive how you treated Hank. He loved you like a daughter, and you abandoned him. You didn't come to his funeral or support Maggie. You were part of the lies against him. So, no, I can't give you what you're asking for. I hope you and your son find happiness, but without me in the picture. As Sandra began to cry, an attendant approached to let me know that my companion, Miss Nielsen, and our daughter had already boarded. Sandra's eyes widened at the mention of Meredith's maiden name, recognizing it from my research paper. I turned and walked toward the Gulfstream jet, a perk from the trustees' event. Soon, we were cruising at 30,000 feet, with Pamela in my lap, engrossed in her coloring book. I closed my eyes, letting go of the last bit of pain from Sandra. A little nudge brought me back to the moment. Pamela was seeking my attention. She showed me her math scribbles, and I smiled, confirming her work was spot on. Satisfied, she returned to her coloring. Meredith, amused, was browsing for a baby bassinet on her laptop. I closed my eyes once more, reflecting on how, despite the imperfect world, finding your soulmate made every move, every risk worth it. Then I felt another gentle nudge from my little girl. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.